The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly outside the observation window of the royal starship Dominion. Inside, Princess Vera of the Zalorian Empire stood alone, staring at the icy void. Her lavender skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, her golden eyes reflecting a mixture of defiance and despair. Behind her, the echoes of the Emperor's final words before her banishment rang like a death knell in her mind. "You are weak, Vera. You shame the royal bloodline. Perhaps exile will teach you strength." The words had cut deeper than any blade. Vera had been born into privilege, the youngest daughter of the fearsome alien King Kordax, ruler of 1,000 worlds. Yet she lacked the physical prowess and ruthless cunning her siblings had inherited. While they trained in the art of war, mastering combat and strategy, Vera immersed herself in art, music, and the histories of the conquered. She saw the beauty in creation, not destruction, a trait her father viewed as an unforgivable flaw. And now she was here, aboard a ship bound for an unremarkable war-torn planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Her father's decree was cruelly simple: survive or perish. There would be no royal guards, no advanced weapons, no council of advisors. Only her, the desolate planet below, and a human. A mysterious assignment. The human was waiting for her in the cargo bay when the ship landed. Vera expected some towering, brutish soldier, but instead she was met with a lean, rugged man clad in worn combat gear. He leaned casually against a crate, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His short brown hair was peppered with gray, and his piercing green eyes held an unsettling mix of amusement and wariness. "You must be the princess," he said, his voice smooth but carrying the faint edge of sarcasm. "Name's Caleb." Vera bristled at his tone. "And you're the human my father sent to babysit me?" Caleb chuckled. "Babysit? No. Train? Maybe. Survive with? Definitely." He gestured toward the barren landscape visible through the bay doors. "This planet's no joke. If we're gonna make it out alive, you'd better start listening." Vera straightened, her pride stung. "I don't need your help." "Sure you don't," Caleb replied, pushing off the crate. "That's why your daddy sent me." Before Vera could retort, the ship's automated systems announced their departure. The engines roared and the vessel lifted off, leaving the pair alone in the hostile wilderness. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the faint metallic tang of distant battles. The ground was littered with jagged rocks and alien flora that pulsed faintly with bioluminescence. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of distant gunfire echoed, a reminder that this was not a place of peace. The first trial. Their first night was a harsh awakening. Caleb insisted they camp near the wreckage of an old supply depot, salvaging what little they could. He handed Vera a crude blade made from scavenged sovereign tech. "Lesson 1," he said, his tone unusually serious. "Always be ready to defend yourself. Out here you won't get second chances." Vera scoffed but took the blade reluctantly. "Do you really think I'll need this? I have the strength of a Zalorian." Caleb's response was a grim laugh. "Strength won't save you when you're ambushed by predators or rival scavengers. Smarts will." That night, as Vera tried to sleep under the cold expanse of stars, her doubts began to creep in. The planet felt alive in a way she couldn't explain. Every rustle of the wind, every flicker of the glowing plants, every distant howl in the night, it all felt like a warning. But she refused to show fear, especially not to a human. Her defiance was put to the test at dawn. Caleb was already awake, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a makeshift spear. He tossed it to her as she rose. "Time for a hunt," he said. "We need food." Vera frowned. "Hunt what?" "Whatever doesn't kill us first," Caleb replied with a smirk. The hunt was a disaster. Vera's royal upbringing had not prepared her for the visceral reality of survival. She stumbled through the rocky terrain, her attempts at stealth laughable. Caleb, on the other hand, moved like a predator, silent, focused, lethal. When they finally cornered a strange insect-like creature the size of a small dog, Vera froze, unable to strike. "Do it," Caleb barked. "Now?" The creature lunged and Caleb intervened, taking it down with a swift strike. He glared at Vera as he cleaned his blade. "You hesitate, you die," he said coldly. "Out here no one's gonna save you but yourself." Vera felt a surge of shame and anger. She had always been told she was weak and now this human was proving it. But beneath the anger was a spark of determination. She wouldn't let him or her father be right. A fateful encounter. Over the next few days, Caleb pushed Vera harder than she thought possible. He taught her how to track and hunt, how to build shelters, and how to fight with the crude weapons they'd fashioned. She failed more often than she succeeded, but each failure fueled her resolve. She began to see the wilderness not as an enemy but as a teacher, its challenges shaping her in ways she couldn't have imagined. It was during one of these lessons that they encountered their first real threat. They were scavenging an abandoned outpost when a group of raiders appeared, their armor pieced together from scraps of Sovereign and Zalorian tech. Their leader, a towering reptilian alien, snarled as he spotted the pair. "Well, what do we have here?" the raider hissed. "A Zalorian princess and her pet human. Looks like we've hit the jackpot." Caleb stepped in front of Vera, his stance protective. "Stay behind me," he muttered. But Vera surprised herself. She stepped forward, gripping her makeshift blade tightly. "I can handle this." The raiders laughed, but their mockery only steeled her resolve. For the first time, she felt something awaken within her, a fire that had been smothered for too long. She wasn't just fighting for survival now, she was fighting for her pride, her honor, and her right to exist on her own terms. The battle was chaotic and brutal. Caleb fought with the precision of a seasoned warrior, but it was Vera who turned the tide. She moved with a newfound confidence, her blade flashing as she struck down one raider after another. When the dust settled, the raiders lay defeated, and Vera stood amidst the wreckage, her breathing heavy, her hands trembling. Caleb gave her a rare nod of approval. "Not bad, princess," he said. "Not bad at all." Vera didn't reply. She didn't need to. For the first time in her life she felt strong, not because of her lineage but because of her own will. The princess who had once been mocked as weak was beginning to transform. But this was only the beginning of her journey. The trials ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine, forcing her to confront not only the dangers of the wild but also the deeper truths about herself, her people, and the human who had become her unlikely ally. The days following the raid began to blur into a rhythm of relentless survival. For Vera, the initial rush of triumph after defeating the raiders was quickly tempered by the brutal demands of life on the barren world. Her muscles ached, her hands blistered from wielding makeshift weapons, and her pride bore the constant sting of Caleb's unyielding training. "Victory's fleeting," Caleb said one morning as they set off from their temporary camp. "Out here you don't get to celebrate. You fight, you survive, and then you fight again." Vera glared at him but held her tongue. Deep down she knew he was right. The planet wasn't just indifferent to their survival, it actively sought their demise. Its strange flora and fauna operated on rules she couldn't yet understand. Plants that glowed invitingly at night turned out to be carnivorous traps. Streams of water that looked pristine carried toxins that burned her throat when she drank. And always there was the looming threat of other scavengers and raiders, drawn to any sign of weakness. The turning point. One evening, as the orange sun dipped below the jagged horizon, Caleb took her to a ridge overlooking the remains of an ancient battlefield. Rusted hulks of alien machinery lay scattered across the landscape, their twisted forms a testament to the ferocity of the long-past conflict. Some of the wreckage still hummed faintly with residual energy, casting eerie shadows in the growing darkness. "Why are we here?" Vera asked, her voice wary. Caleb gestured to the battlefield. "Because this is where you'll learn your next lesson." He picked up a jagged piece of metal from the ground and handed it to her. "We need weapons. Real weapons. And this graveyard is full of them, if you know where to look." Vera frowned, examining the scrap in her hands. "You want me to scavenge? Like some common raider?" Caleb's expression darkened. "Survival doesn't care about your royal bloodline, princess. You think your father's empire was built on honor and pride? No. It was built on the backs of people like me, scavengers, soldiers, survivors. If you can't stoop to get your hands dirty, you're as good as dead." His words stung, but they also ignited something within her. She had spent her life looking down on humans, viewing them as little more than tools or pawns in the grand chess game of the Zalorian Empire. But here, on this desolate world, it was a human who had kept her alive, who was teaching her the skills her own people had never thought she'd need. Without another word, she began to sift through the wreckage, her fingers digging through the cold, sharp fragments of the past. Caleb worked alongside her, showing her how to identify components that could be repurposed into weapons or tools. It was tedious, grueling work, but by the time the twin moons rose high in the sky, they had assembled a small arsenal. A pair of crude energy blades, a blaster rifle with limited charge, and several jagged throwing knives. "Not bad," Caleb said, inspecting their haul. "You're starting to look like a warrior." Vera smirked, despite herself. "Maybe I'm just a fast learner." A growing bond. As the weeks wore on, Vera and Caleb began to develop an unspoken rhythm. They scavenged together, hunted together, fought together. And while their personalities often clashed, Vera's stubborn pride colliding with Caleb's blunt pragmatism. They began to understand and even respect each other. One night as they sat by the fire, Caleb surprised her by asking, "Why do you think your father sent you here?" Vera hesitated, staring into the flames. "Because he thinks I'm weak. That I'm unworthy of the throne." Caleb shook his head. "Nah. If he thought you were truly weak, he'd have left you to rot in the royal palace. Sending you here, it's a test. He wants to see if you'll break or rise." The idea unsettled her. She had spent her life resenting her father, seeing him as a tyrant who valued strength above all else. But now she wondered if there was something more to his decision. Was this exile truly a punishment, or was it his way of forging her into something greater? "What about you?" she asked, deflecting the spotlight. "Why would a human agree to work for the Zalorian Empire?" Caleb's expression darkened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he said quietly, "Because it was that or watch my people starve. The Empire destroyed my homeworld, stripped it of resources. They offered me a choice, serve or die. So I served." Vera felt a pang of guilt. Her people's conquest had always seemed distant, abstract, a necessary evil to maintain the Empire's dominance. But hearing Caleb's story made it real in a way she hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. Caleb gave her a wry smile. "Don't be. Just make sure you're worth the trouble I'm going through to keep you alive." A deadly ambush. Their uneasy truce was put to the test when they stumbled upon a rival scavenger group one morning. The group, a mix of alien species, had set up camp near a cache of advanced weaponry buried beneath the ruins of an old outpost. Vera and Caleb had been scouting the area when they were spotted. The scavengers attacked without warning, their weapons flashing in the sunlight. Caleb shoved Vera behind a boulder, firing back with his blaster. "Stay down," he shouted. But Vera didn't stay down. Heart pounding, she gripped one of the energy blades they had scavenged and leapt into the fray. The training Caleb had drilled into her over the past weeks kicked in, her movements instinctive and precise. She parried a blow from a reptilian scavenger, then spun and drove her blade into its side. Another attacker lunged at her, and she dispatched him with a throwing knife. By the time the skirmish ended, the ground was littered with bodies. Vera stood amidst the carnage, her chest heaving, her blade slick with alien blood. Caleb approached her, his expression unreadable. "Not bad, princess," he said finally. "Not bad at all." She met his gaze, and for the first time she felt like she had truly earned his respect. A growing storm. As they scavenged the rival group's camp, Caleb found something that made his expression darken. A hollow beacon bearing the crest of the Zalorian Empire. "They weren't just scavengers," he muttered. "They were Imperial operatives." Vera's blood ran cold. If the Empire was sending operatives to this planet, it could only mean one thing. Her father's test wasn't just about survival. There was a larger game at play, one that she and Caleb were only beginning to glimpse. But Vera wasn't the same timid princess who had first landed on this world. She was stronger now, sharper. And as she looked out over the barren landscape, she made a silent vow. Whatever her father's true intentions, she would prove herself worthy, not for him but for herself. The revelation that the scavengers were Imperial operatives hit Vera like a thunderstorm. As she and Caleb moved deeper into the desolate terrain, her mind raced with questions. Why were they sent here? Was her father monitoring her progress, or was something more sinister at play? Caleb, ever the pragmatist, offered few answers. His focus was survival, and he made it clear that pondering Imperial motives wouldn't keep them alive. The silent rift. Their dynamics shifted in the days following the discovery. Vera's mood grew darker, and her frustration with Caleb's stoic nature boiled over during a tense conversation near a dried riverbed. "Why won't you tell me what you really think?" she snapped, slamming her fist into the jagged rocks. Caleb raised an eyebrow, leaning on the makeshift spear he had fashioned from scavenged parts. "Because what I think doesn't matter, princess. What matters is what you're going to do about it." "That's your problem," Vera spat. "You're so focused on surviving that you've forgotten how to fight for something bigger." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he gestured to the barren landscape around them. "You see this? This is what happens when you fight for something bigger. Your empire turned this planet into a wasteland chasing dreams of glory. I'll fight for survival any day over that." His words stung, but Vera refused to back down. She had come to respect Caleb's strength, but his refusal to believe in anything greater than himself frustrated her. "You can't hide in the shadows forever," she said, her voice quieter now. "At some point you have to take a stand." Caleb didn't respond. He simply turned and began walking again, leaving Vera alone with her thoughts. The ancient city. A week later, their search for supplies brought them to the ruins of an ancient city. The crumbling structures towered over them, their alien architecture a haunting reminder of a once great civilization. The air was heavy with a strange energy, and Vera felt a chill run down her spine as they entered the city's outskirts. "This place doesn't feel right," Caleb muttered, his hand hovering near the blaster on his hip. Vera nodded, her own instincts screaming at her to leave. But something about the city called to her, a faint, inexplicable pull that she couldn't ignore. "There might be something here," she said. "Something worth the risk." Caleb hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But we move quickly. In and out." As they ventured deeper into the city, they discovered that the ruins weren't as abandoned as they had first thought. Strange, insect-like creatures skittered through the shadows, their eyes glinting with malevolent intelligence. The creatures seemed to be guarding something, and Caleb was quick to suggest turning back. "We don't need whatever's in there," he said firmly. "Let's go." But Vera's resolve had hardened. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not until I find out what they're protecting." Her defiance irritated Caleb, but he didn't argue. Instead, he drew his blaster and prepared for a fight. "Fine," he said. "But don't say I didn't warn you." A hidden power. The center of the city was dominated by a massive, cathedral-like structure. Its walls were covered in strange glyphs that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Vera felt the pull grow stronger as she approached, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. Inside the structure, they found a pedestal surrounded by the insect-like creatures. Atop the pedestal rested a sphere of shimmering energy, its surface constantly shifting and writhing like liquid fire. Vera's breath caught as she realized what it was, an ancient relic of immense power, likely the reason her father had sent her to this forsaken planet. "We're not touching that," Caleb said, his voice firm. But Vera ignored him. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched, and the creatures immediately reacted. They surged toward her, their shrill cries echoing through the chamber. Caleb fired his blaster, taking down several of them, but there were too many. "Vera," he shouted. "Get back." But she didn't retreat. With a surge of determination, she reached the pedestal and placed her hands on the sphere. The moment she made contact, a wave of energy erupted from the relic, knocking the creatures back and sending Caleb sprawling. Vera gasped as the energy coursed through her, flooding her mind with visions of the past. She saw the city as it once was, its inhabitants thriving before their world was consumed by war. She saw the relic being created as a last-ditch effort to defend their civilization, a weapon of unimaginable power that had ultimately failed to save them. When the visions ended, Vera collapsed to her knees, the sphere still clutched in her hands. The creatures had retreated, seemingly cowed by the display of power. Caleb approached cautiously, his blaster still at the ready. "What just happened?" Vera looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly with the energy of the relic. "I think I just found our way off this planet." The price of power. As they made their way out of the city, the relic's power began to manifest in strange ways. Vera found herself moving faster, thinking clearer, and reacting to threats with almost supernatural precision. But the power came at a cost. The energy was volatile, and every time she used it, she felt a part of herself slipping away. Caleb noticed the change and confronted her one night as they camped near a river. "This thing, it's changing you," he said, his voice filled with concern. Vera nodded, her expression grim. "I can feel it. But we don't have a choice. If we're going to survive, I need this power." Caleb frowned. "Surviving isn't worth losing yourself." But Vera wasn't so sure. For the first time in her life, she felt truly strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was willing to pay the price if it meant proving herself worthy of the throne. "I'll be fine," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "I can handle this." Caleb didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he simply said, "Let's hope you're right." The journey back from the ruins of the ancient city was fraught with tension. Vera carried the relic like a burden she couldn't set down, its energy crackling faintly in her grasp. Caleb was quieter than usual, his wary eyes flicking between her and the horizon. He had seen what power did to people, how it corrupted, how it consumed. And though he didn't say it aloud, he feared the same fate awaited Vera. The final trial. Days later, as they neared the shuttle wreckage that had been their original landing site, they encountered an ominous sight: Imperial dropships descending from the sky. The sleek vessels landed with military precision, their engines roaring before cutting to silence. Vera and Caleb crouched behind a ridge, watching as dozens of armored soldiers disembarked. Vera clenched her fists, the relic's energy flaring faintly at her fingertips. "They're here for me," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and dread. Caleb frowned. "This isn't a rescue mission, is it?" "No," she admitted. "If my father sent them, it's because he thinks I've failed. They're here to eliminate me." Caleb swore under his breath. "Great. So what's the plan?" Vera stared at the soldiers assembling below. She felt the relic's power surging within her, its whispers growing louder. It promised her victory, strength, survival. But deep down she knew there was a cost she might not fully understand until it was too late. "We fight," she said finally. "We show them that I'm not the weak daughter they thought they sent here." Caleb sighed. "Figured you'd say that." A battle for the ages. The Imperial soldiers advanced with ruthless efficiency, their blasters lighting up the rocky terrain. Caleb provided covering fire, his aim sharp and unerring, but it was Vera who truly turned the tide. As the soldiers closed in, she unleashed the relic's power, a wave of energy that shattered their ranks like glass. She moved like a force of nature, her energy blade cutting through armor and flesh with ease. The soldiers' training and advanced technology were no match for her newfound strength. But with each burst of power, Vera felt the relic tightening its grip on her. It wasn't just a tool, it was alive, and it was feeding on her, reshaping her into something else. She ignored the growing unease, focusing instead on the battle at hand. Caleb fought beside her, his gruff voice shouting warnings and orders. They made an unlikely team, human and alien, scavenger and royal exile. But together they were unstoppable. When the dust finally settled, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of Imperial soldiers. The surviving dropships retreated, their engines roaring as they disappeared into the sky. Vera stood amidst the carnage, her chest heaving, the relic glowing ominously in her hands. She had won, but at what cost? The reckoning. As the adrenaline faded, Caleb approached her cautiously. "You okay?" he asked, though he could already see the answer in her haunted eyes. Vera shook her head. "No, I'm not." The relic's whispers were louder now, almost deafening. It promised her more power, more strength, but she could feel it consuming her, stripping away the parts of herself that made her who she was. "I can't keep this," she said, her voice trembling. "It's too much." Caleb frowned. "Then get rid of it?" "It's not that simple," she said. "The relic is bound to me now. If I destroy it, it might destroy me." Caleb sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then you've got a choice to make. Either you find a way to control it or you let it go, no matter the cost." Vera stared at the relic, its surface shifting like liquid fire. She thought about her father, her people, the empire she had been destined to rule. But she also thought about Caleb, about the unlikely friendship they had forged on this desolate world. And she thought about herself, about the person she had become, and the person she wanted to be. The final act. That night, under the light of the twin moons, Vera made her decision. She and Caleb returned to the ruins of the ancient city, the relic pulsing in her hands like a living heart. The energy within it surged as if sensing her intent, but she held firm. "I'm going to destroy it," she said, her voice steady. Caleb nodded. "How?" "I saw something in the visions it gave me," she said. "A way to return it to the core of the planet. The energy will be absorbed back into the world where it belongs." "And you?" Caleb asked. Vera hesitated. "I don't know." Together, they descended into the heart of the ruins, following the path the relic seemed to guide her toward. At the center of the city, they found a massive chasm, its depths glowing faintly with the same energy as the relic. "This is it," she said, stepping to the edge. Caleb grabbed her arm. "Are you sure about this?" She nodded. "If I don't do this, the relic will consume me, and anyone else who tries to take it." Before Caleb could argue, she stepped forward and hurled the relic into the chasm. The reaction was immediate. A blinding surge of light erupted from the depths, shaking the ground and sending shockwaves through the air. Vera cried out as the energy tore through her, burning away the last remnants of the relic's hold on her. When the light faded, she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Caleb rushed to her side, his heart pounding as he checked for a pulse. Relief flooded him when he found one, faint but steady. A new beginning. When Vera woke, the first thing she saw was Caleb's worried face. "You're alive," he said, his voice gruff with relief. "Barely," she muttered, sitting up. Her body felt weak, but her mind was clear, clearer than it had been in weeks. The relic's whispers were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. "You did it," Caleb said. "You destroyed it?" She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. We did it. As they made their way back to their makeshift camp, Vera felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known before. She might never rule the Zalorian Empire, but she had discovered something far more important: her own strength and the courage to stand on her own. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the path ahead. Whatever challenges awaited, she knew she could face them, because she wasn't alone. Caleb walked beside her, and together, they were ready to face whatever the galaxy threw at them. Their journey wasn't over, but for now they had won their freedom. And that was enough.